And he named some of those issues. You know what I'm talking about. Relationships, money, worry, anxiety. How do you manage your anxiety? Like, what's your go-to in those moments? And it can be from a variety of things. It might be anxiety from the past, second-guessing something and just ruminating over. It's like, man, did I make the right decision? Did I say the right thing? Did I say the wrong thing? And now you're all anxious about it. Maybe it's about the future and the unknown. How do you handle that? How do you manage it? Because if you get enough life behind you, you eventually mature and you figure out this little truth of, we don't have as much control as maybe we thought we did. And we hate that. I want the control. What do you do with that anxiety? What do you do with your worry about your children? Maybe it's the other direction. What do you do with the worry about your parents? Maybe they're aging. All kinds of things to make us anxious and to give us fear. What's your response? What's your go-to? Is it anger? That can come out. That's an easy one. But it's secondary. Underlying anger is usually some kind of fear, some kind of anxiety. What's it for you? And what do you do with it? Because we all manage it somehow. We have a go-to. What's your first go-to? Hang on to that, and we'll come back to it at the end. But right now we're going to pick back up in the story of Exodus. I'm going to pick up where Moses finally is making it back into Egypt, and him and his younger brother Aaron are now getting ready to go to Pharaoh. Now they've already gone to the Israelites, and they go to the Israelites, and they do some signs for them, and they share everything that God had said, and the Israelites are like, yes, right on, we are in. They bow down, they worship, this is good, God has seen our misery, he's heard us, we're in. Now, why is Aaron with Moses? We didn't cover that. Because back at the bush that has flames of fires at it, when God calls Moses into this story to go further into it, Moses gives him 5 different objections, or some hesitations, as some scholars will say. It's a little bit softening of it, but we know what he's talking about. Moses gave him 5. I would have given him like 25. Like, really? This is what you want me to do? And I know some of you are sitting out there and you're like, well, actually, if it were me and God came and spoke to me in that way, I would have no hesitations. I would do it the first thing. That's all I need, just for him to communicate directly to me, and I would obediently and faithfully follow it. No, you wouldn't. Don't lie. That's just not us. We might think we would, but no, we'd start running things in our head. Well, I don't know if I really heard God speak. Am I just making it up in my own mind? And whatever was happening with that bush, well, I don't know. I don't right now have an explanation for it, but one day, we will have a good scientific explanation that will explain why that bush was doing what it was doing and not being consumed. We make objections. But God has spoken to some of you, hasn't he? Some of you do have something that's stirring inside of you. I use that word stirring because a lot of us aren't going to have these burning bush moments. It's not normative. But we do serve a God who still speaks. Reflecting back on the Exodus account, Paul writes in Romans 8, all who are children of God are led by the Spirit of God. He leads us through this life and he speaks to us and he puts things on our heart. And I use that word heart in its fullest Hebrew sense, the lave. It's the seat of one's intellect, emotions, feelings, will. God stirs in these. It's what he did in Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a faithful Hebrew. He's working for a pagan king as a cupbearer, tasting his food to make sure it's not poison, not exactly what you want to be doing. But God stirs something in his heart to go rebuild the wall around the temple that's getting rebuilt in Jerusalem. How does he know God called it to him? No burning bush, no phone call, nothing spectacular. He had put the thing on his heart. How many of you have a thing that's stirring on your heart? And what do we learn in the Proverbs? Without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. When you take that and you put it in community and God's calling you to something, how do you step into it? And you might say, well, that's kind of risky. And it might not work out. If God is stirring on your heart, this is just a little bit of an aside. But it has to do with that anxiety about the future. What do you do with it? How do you manage it? How do you move into it? Because the risk of not doing it is even greater. And here's what I mean. So one of my favorite jobs, I would say I have two favorite jobs. I love pastoring, but there was a job that I had early, right out of high school and through my college years, and it was coaching swimming. Now, I myself was a swimmer, had a fairly successful high school career in swimming, but then I went and I coached. And I coached, actually in the area, I coached the Summer League of Ellisville swim team. Had about 120 swimmers at that time, and I was primarily responsible for the 10 and unders. So I had ages 4 to 10. And some of these little ones, I mean, they can barely get their, they're falling out of their swimsuits and everything else. They're so tiny. It's their first time getting into the water. And so that was my job. And so I get them acclimated, and it was cool when you see one of those 5-year-olds or their 6-year-olds, when you see them finish their first lap for the first time and they don't drown, they're not pulling in the lane ropes, they're not jumping off the bottom. That was more rewarding than anything else I'd ever done. But part of that was to get them to enjoy and to love the water. And so eventually I had to get them going off the starting blocks. Now when you're this little and you're going off a starting block this high, there's a little fear, there's a little anxiety. So I'd start them with just a little bit. Take them on the side, hand over hand, get them to start diving in, used to the water. Then I have them stand up and do it, a little bit more of a drop, a little bit more of a free fall. Then they learned they could do that. All right, let's go check out those starting blocks. Yeah. They learned they could do that. And then before insurance companies ruined everything, we used to have these things called diving boards and springboards. So then I would say, look at that thing down there. You want to do that? Oh, their eyes would get big. You've done this. You've done the starting blocks. Let's go to the springboard. And so we would take them over there. They would take that long walk out, eyes all big. I'd be in the water treading with arms up. And they'd jump. And you see the exhilaration in their face. And yet there's a free fall. But they did it, and it was rewarding, and it was exciting, and it gave them this vigoration for loving the water and what they could do. God is a little bit like that. Take this small jump. I'll catch you. All right, now it's time for a bigger one. All right, we're taking another. You're going to feel like you're in free fall a little bit longer this time. But I will catch you if you'll trust me. What happens if we don't? I would argue we become disenfranchised. We become bored. Because God does some of his best work in those moments of unknowing, in those moments of the free fall, when we have to depend on him. In fact, there's a little bit of a spiritual discipline of getting in over your head. I've got to be in positions that I have to trust him. And when that starts happening, you see him show up. And you can have all these other arguments for God, but when you see his hand at work in your life like that, that's what moves you on. That's what gets the story a little bit more exciting. Is it scary? Oh, yeah. But he's good. And you can trust him. So Moses, he thinks he's getting in a little bit over his head. So in his 4th and 5th objections, he says to God in Exodus 4, he says, "Oh, my Lord, I'm not eloquent. I don't speak all that well." God comes to him and says, who gives the mouth? Who controls the speech? I'm going to go with you. Moses says, "Oh, my Lord, please, no, send someone else." And this time, the anger of the Lord starts to get kindled up a little bit. God's like, you got to go do this thing. And so he says, fine, you go. And I've already got Aaron coming. He's on his way. He's going to speak for you, your younger brother. So God's got it worked out. Moses is going to go. This is where Aaron comes in the story. And he says, oh, by the way, Moses, that staff in your hand, make sure you take it. See, the staff begins to loom large in the following narrative. And I agree with some of the Hebrew scholars that the staff that primarily shows up in this account is actually the staff of Moses, sometimes called the staff of God in Exodus 4:20. And the way that I get there is in Exodus 17:5, later in the story, when they're out in the desert, God says to Moses, take the staff that struck the Nile. Now, was it Moses or Aaron that struck the Nile? Most likely it was Aaron. That's the staff. It seems that Moses had given Aaron his staff, the staff of God. And even when you go in Exodus 7, when you see them holding it over the Nile, it's not Aaron and Moses hold their staffs. It's that Aaron took the staff. Which staff? The staff that we already know about, the staff of Moses. Now, why is that important? Because it's the ordinary staff of an ordinary shepherd out in the desert doing ordinary things made out of ordinary wood. And that's going to matter because the staff isn't magical. It's not imbued with magical powers. And Moses and Aaron are about to go into a culture that is all about magic. It's all about charms, spells, commanding deities. But the thing that's going to be different for Moses and Aaron is that God is with them. And that's why it's called the staff of God. And something's going to be different about this than the powers that the Egyptians conjure up. It's the great I Am who is going with them. So this is where they get their confidence. This is where they get their ability. So Moses and Aaron, they go to the Israelites. The Israelites are all in, and then they go to Pharaoh. So now we're in Exodus 5. Afterwards, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go." And now we're getting into some of the major themes here of the Old Testament, of the book of Exodus. When he says, you can back that up a couple slides, when he says, I'm not going to obey him. Our word there, Shema, to obey or to hear. It's Israel's confession. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your might, and all of your soul. What's Pharaoh saying? I don't hear this God. I'm not going to obey this God. I don't love this God. And in fact, I don't even know this God. Now, this whole thing of the plagues, this idea of knowing that Yada, the word in the Hebrew, shows up over and over again, that you may know that Yahweh is the Lord, that he is God, and there is no other besides him. And Pharaoh says, I don't know him, but he will. See, everybody's going to come to know God one way or the other. You will come to know him in judgment, or you will come to know him in blessing. But everyone's going to come to know God. For Pharaoh, unfortunately, he's going to come to know the power of God through judgment. And we start to see these powers between Pharaoh and God start to come into conflict with one another. And it shows up again in Exodus 5 here, where you see this phrase that gets repeated in Exodus 5:1. Afterwards, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, "Thus says the Lord." He says, "Let my people go." Pharaoh says, "Nope, nah, not going to do it. They're going to stay here. They're going to serve me. In fact, thus says Pharaoh, I'm not giving them straw. I'm going to make it harder. I'm going to make it worse. It's going to get more difficult on their lives." Whose word is going to win out? The word of God or the word of Pharaoh? We're starting to see these two things come in conflict. They want radically different things. And of course, the Israelites, they realize this isn't good. Things are getting worse for them. They use this funny, weird phrase. Sometimes things just stick with you in the Hebrew because it's so visual. And he says, "You've made us a stench." In the Hebrew, it's almost, you've given us a bad case of halitosis before Pharaoh. You've made us like the worst kind of breath in his face, and now he has contempt for us. And he's probably going to kill us. And so these same people who were all in before, like Moses, like, judgment be on you before God, whether this is a good thing. See, before they're all in. It's a new beginning, new change. God's up to something, but now it gets hard, it gets difficult. Now they're questioning things. Being in the will of God doesn't mean that things get easier. Oftentimes they can get more difficult. So they complain to Moses. And then Moses goes and complains to God. "God, why'd you ever send me? This isn't working out the way we talked about. It's getting worse." And God responds, Exodus 6:1, "But the Lord said to Moses, now you shall see what I shall do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of this land." Now the Hebrew word for hand there, yad, it can mean hand, and most often that's what it means, but it also means arm. And you see these dual phrases that show up, especially in Exodus and also in Deuteronomy, that the Lord, Yahweh, has a strong hand A strong arm. Well, where does that come from? It comes from ancient Egypt. The Egyptians started in the Middle Kingdom, so it's a little bit before the time of Moses, but it's really prevalent in the New Kingdom. Now, bingo, that's right where we are, probably around 1440 BC in that era. You see that the pharaohs have a strong arm, an outstretched arm. In fact, some of their titles are possessor of a strong arm, might of arm. Thutmose III speaks of victories and military accomplishments by his very own arm. It was the strong arm of Pharaoh who cast out the Egyptians' enemies. Even Ramesses II, 4 of his sons, he gives them names that have embedded in them the Hebrew or the Egyptian name for arm. It was a big deal. But it wasn't just Pharaoh's arm and Pharaoh's hand. It was understood to be imbued with deity, with the very power of the gods. The supreme god Anum, the warrior god Set, and Mantu. It's not just Pharaoh. It's the gods that he imbues, that work through him and in him to the point where he is considered deity. So what's happening here, by saying that Yahweh is going to use his strong arm, he's going to defeat the strong arm of Pharaoh. And everybody in that culture knew what that meant. That Yahweh has the upper hand, and not just against Pharaoh, but all the gods of Egypt, all the principalities, all the dominions, everything, every force in the cosmos is in play here. Moses' father-in-law, he understands this later when they come out and he meets him back in the desert. His father-in-law Jethro says, "Blessed be the Lord who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, out of the hand of Pharaoh. He has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods." It was the hand of God versus the hand of Pharaoh. And the hand of God wins. He gets the upper hand. That's part of what the story is about. God is the greater one. He is the one who fights. So back in Exodus 6, God says to Moses, "I'm going to reveal myself as Yahweh, the great I am, the one who was faithful to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but even more. You're going to see greater things, more powerful things. You're going to see covenant promises and fulfillment that they never saw." But then he says to them, "But I will harden Pharaoh's heart." This is Exodus 7. "And though I multiply my signs and wonders in the land, Pharaoh will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring my hosts, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment. The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord." Again, hosts there, it's military language, sa'avot. These are his armies that he's raising up, but not normal armies. God is the God who fights for this army. And that's why previously you get those genealogies again there in Exodus, just like an ancient war scroll. They're going through the armies that God is bringing out. This is his army that's going to compete against Egypt. But again, God is the one who's going to fight. And in Exodus 7, 8 through 13, "Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, 'Prove yourself by working a miracle,' then you shall say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent.' So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron cast down his staff before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers, and they, the magicians of Egypt, also did the same by their secret arts. For each man cast down his staff, and they became serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Still, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said." Here's that staff again. That staff that's important. Now, this imagery of the staff, it shows up throughout the plagues, but there's a bookend here. So between Exodus 7 at the beginning of the plagues and then Exodus 15 at the end of the plagues, when Israel is now in psalm and singing, celebrating what God had done, and you see the same concept show up again. So you have the staff turn into a serpent and swallow up the staff of the magicians of Egypt. The word for swallow there, bala. Go ahead and say that, bala. Say it, bala. All right, swallows it up. That word only occurs 2 times in Exodus. It occurs there, and then in Exodus 15. "You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them up. Again, poetically celebrating the waters swallowing up and coming over the Egyptians. So you have this imagery of a staff, a serpent swallowing up, the staff that divided the waters that then swallowed up the Egyptians. Part of this is prophetic that's happening in Exodus 7. That the power of God is going to swallow up the power of Pharaoh, the powers of Egypt, and their gods. But why the serpents? Because in Egypt, serpents were a big deal. So the Pharaoh was believed to be deity and involved with divine powers. Part of those divine powers came from their entire pantheon of gods. But two of the most significant powers came from the two goddesses of Egypt. You had the goddess of Lower Egypt and the goddess of Upper Egypt. Now remember, Nile's up here, so the land's going down. So Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. And those two goddesses were symbolized by the cobra. And so when the Pharaoh put his crown on, his diadem, we have many ancient artifacts that had the twin cobras on them. This was Pharaoh's power to rule and to reign. Not to mention, the Egyptians prided themselves on manipulating venomous creatures, especially snakes. And the snake in Egypt, it was divine power, divine healing, and part of a symbol of their divine magical arts. So in swallowing up the serpents, it's a little bit of an affront and an attack on what Egypt was most proud of. And saying that the divine is going to swallow everything up that stands against him. And it's a little bit of mockery. In fact, you read in Exodus 10:2, and then it's the Greek translation, uses this word empaizo, and it says, tell your kids and your grandkids about this, how God made a mockery of the Egyptians. I was like, all right, we'll play serpents. I'm going to swallow you up. And so that's this idea of the serpents there. And then that gets us into the plagues. What do we do with the plagues and the things that we start seeing in these accounts? We've got magical arts, secret arts. What are these things? But when you go back and you read ancient documents, Egypt was known for their magical arts. They were known for their white magic and their black arts. That term black arts came from their metallurgy. They would separate gold and iron from their natural ore, and out of that would come a black powder. And that black powder, they believed, also had magical properties to it. And so the Egyptians, who were known for their magical prowess, being able to command deities and the forces and the powers and work in the metals, it was called Kamea. Now the Arabs, when they would write about this, they would add the definite article al. That's where you get the word al-Kamea, alchemy. This is what Egyptian is known for. And you read some of these stories that are presented as history from the accounts of people who came in contact with the Egyptians, and I only got two words to describe it. Not very technical. Freaky and creepy. It's crazy the stuff that they're doing. They're tapping into something. They are known for their amulets, for their magical stones, their incantations, their seances. All of these things are part of Egyptian culture. And the Bible never comes along and says, you know what, you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. It's all just sleight of hand. Nothing's really happening. It's not the Bible's posture towards any of this. In fact, we get a warning in Deuteronomy 18. You all need to be different. You've got anxiety about the future. You want to know about the future. You don't go to fortune tellers. You don't go to sorcerers. You don't engage in divination. It doesn't say you don't do that because it doesn't work. It says you don't do that because you're tapping into something, and you're tapping into something dark. And that will bring destruction into your life as you open up those channels. Instead, the faithful, what do? When it comes to our future and the unknown, you trust Yahweh. You trust his strong arm in his hand with our futures. So you've got the magic, and then you've got the plagues. Now, some would try to write these off as mere myth. The problem is, It doesn't look like the myths of that time. Real geography, real people, real things. Nor will it do to say, well, there's just natural explanations for the things that we see. It goes something like this. In June, the Nile becomes stagnant and red with microscopic organisms. In July, the frogs abound under the inundation of the Nile and its flooding. Hot summer, damp autumn, that brings all kinds of bugs and gnats and everything else. January, you might have some hail and some rain. February, you have the appearance of locusts in the early spring over the green crops. And in March, you can get some darkness from the sandstorms. Perfectly natural explanations. Just a big problem. It doesn't fit the data. A scholar by the name of Joseph Free, and he lists 5 unique aspects to the plagues, which he says set them apart. The first one he says is intensification. That what we're seeing here is intensified beyond anything Egypt had known, beyond any ordinary occurrences. The second thing that sets them apart is prediction. Moses would predict the moment of their arrival and their departure. That's not something that would be a part of natural phenomenon. And then there's discrimination. So you see things like the livestock that are dying, of the hail, of the darkness, and it falls upon Egypt, but it doesn't fall upon Goshen, where Israel is. Again, that's not part of natural occurrences. And there's an orderliness to this. There's an intensification that moves in triads and gets more severe, not something you would expect in purely natural processes. And then finally, there's a moral purpose. There's a reason to all of this. To know Yahweh is God, and there is no other. We're dealing with something we might call a miracle of the Creator God's interference, interruption of what we understand as the natural processes which he set in place and governs over. Why? To make himself known. And each of these plagues that now come upon Israel, they attack each and every area of Egyptian life, of the jurisdictions of their God, and of Pharaoh and what he was to rule over. Because I've said this before, the king of Egypt was meant to maintain order in agriculture, order in the economy, order in social structures, over it all. And if he didn't, that was bad news. He had to maintain the ma'at, the order. And so you see God just meticulously going through and targeting not just every area of Pharaoh's reign, but of that of the Egyptian gods and deity, to the point that at the end of this thing, there's nothing left for any other gods to do. There's only one God, Yahweh. And I'll just take you through a few of these and we'll head for home. The first plague, the Nile turning into blood, affected transportation, shipbuilding, development of ports, agricultural life. The gods dealing with fertility. Multiple gods are involved in the Nile. In fact, there's a hymn of the Nile. Looked it up this week. The bringer of food, rich in provisions, creator of all good, Lord of majesty, sweet of fragrance. Associated with several gods. Noom, considered the guardian of the Nile. Happy, believed to be the spirit of the Nile in this dynamic essence. Nate, the warlike goddess. Hathor, supposed to protect. Osiris, the Nile was his bloodstream. In fact, there's an ancient document when the old kingdom was failing. You read these way before that the Nile was turning to blood. And I don't know what's happening then, but it's a sure sign to Pharaoh that his reign is getting ripped away from him. That Yahweh is the true ruler, the true one who reigns. Then you get into the frogs. Now this is a little bit where I think God is mocking them again, because they held frogs as very sacred. In fact, as part of their rules, that if you killed a frog, even accidentally, you could suffer capital punishment. So imagine now, you've got all these frogs around, and you can't kill them. Not only that, the magicians can't get rid of them. We start seeing the power of God exceeding the magical powers of the Egyptian magicians and their priests. You start getting dust and gnats, The magicians, they can't replicate it anymore. Probably would have made their priest unclean, would have interrupted their sacred practices and their worship. You get to the flies. Again, they don't hit Goshen, but it starts ruining the land. The death of domestic animals. They had their sacred cows, their sacred animals, economic life, several gods associated with those. The ashes, the dust, and the boils. The magicians could no longer appear to do their priestly service, or the priest takes them out of the game. Sitting social life, political life, economic life, religious life, everything is getting hit. You get hail and fire, crops are destroyed, including flax. This is hitting everyday life. See, the Egyptians, they didn't like to wear cotton. They would make their material out of flax. So even their clothes in that arena of life is being affected by everything that's happening here. You get to the locust, you get to the darkness. The sun god was huge in Egypt. Multiple gods related to the sun. God says, nope, just me, the one who called light into existence, who set the sun and the moon in the sky to rule over the days and says the seasons and the days and the years. That's who rules all this. And then the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. Now we'll come back and look at these throughout the weeks as we move forward. But here's the point. Every aspect and arena of Egyptian life in worship had been affected, and the rug got pulled out from under it. There's no gods they can trust in. You can have all the magical arts you want. You're not going to control the future. There's one who's stronger and more powerful. There's only one God, and you will know him in blessing, or you will know him in judgment and curse. Where do you want to stand? And we think, yeah, we don't worry about that stuff. Really? They're worried about it in the New Testament. Asia Minor, that Paul writes to, especially when he writes the letter to Ephesus, they were known for their magical arts as well. You can pull up all the different incantations. I looked at one, and it lists all the names, 14 different names of the gods that you need to call upon so you can be protected in every arena of your life. And then at the end of it, it says, and any other name that might be named. What does Paul say in Ephesians? Jesus is the name above every name. The only name that you need. Where do we put our dependence? Where do we find our trust? Where do we find our security? Do we have superstitious habits? Well, I did this last time and it worked out successful, so I should do that again. Is it our retirement plans? What is it? Where are we putting our trust? Because we're still doing it. What does it mean to surrender every aspect to the arm of God, to trust him? And our first go-to in those moments of anxiety and those moments of fear is to run straight to him and call upon the name above every name that can be named. Is that our first go-to? Because that's what's on offer. The great I am. Just yesterday, God has a funny way of making you practice what you preach. And we have a car that's been on the fritz, and we're borrowing my parents' car. And it's funny because my wife's car, it works for a couple days and then it doesn't. And we're kind of getting the rhythm down to this thing, and it's all electrical issues. So it had worked for a day, so we took a chance last night, especially because we had one of my daughter's friends with us and we needed the space, and my wife, she drove it. And I drove my car too. It's like, we're not taking too much of a chance on this. Well, we make it to the volleyball game, we make it to the ice cream social afterwards, and then we get in the parking lot, we're the last to leave, and my wife, Samantha, she comes to the window and says, yep, it hit, it's not working. So I'm sitting there, I've got the wrench on me because I keep it on me now, and I open the hood, I pull the wires off, and I'm sitting there getting them together. They're sparking and everything else because, you fry the computer, make the thing, hopefully it'll work. It's about the extent of my knowledge. Sometimes it does. So I'm doing that. People are looking at us, and we try it 4 or 5 times, and then I'm walking around my truck, and I'm just like, what in the world? Like, we need to get home. It's getting dark. You know what hit me? You know what my go-to wasn't? I didn't pray about it. It wasn't my first go-to. I'm ripping wires out, doing everything else under the sun. And I said, now God, isn't it interesting? Teaching on your strong arm. You who delivers, on being the first to go to you. And what am I doing? Everything except for that. So I pray. I say, all right, God, this is yours. Whatever you're going to do, sorry I haven't surrendered it to you. Walk back around the truck. My wife says, shut the doors. It's running. I'm driving. Sure enough, we get it home. Now, right now, I coach first grade soccer. And I tell them, be first to the ball. Easy concept. Not so much when you're on the playing field. You have to keep driving it into them. Be that first to the ball. What does it mean to be the first to God? It's the first thing I'm going to go to, be those kind of people. When the worry sets in, when the anxiety sets in, what's my first go-to? God, will you fight my battles with your strong arm, or am I going to go the ways of the world? Am I going to rely on my own means, my own methods, or will I trust you? That's what this story's about. So I'm going to invite our worship team back up. And another part of this story is, in God's economy, we have this bent towards us that words actually matter. You see even here in Egyptian, there's blessings and there's curses. You see it throughout the Hebrew narrative. And God takes it seriously. And that our words matter. What we say matters. Especially over our children and our families. And so where we're headed next week, Pastor Tim's going to speak with us. He'll be teaching. And then after that's our fall festival. Now, as part of our fall festival, we usually get a little bit of a bump in some families in this area. We have 146,000 people within a 5-mile radius, mostly families. So I want to give them a little something like, how can we give them a little bit of a hook to come hear the hope that's on offer, but still stay in Exodus? Well, later in the chapter, God talks about his faithfulness to the generations. So we're going to leap off of that in 2 weeks and talk about God working through the generations. But specifically, how our words matter over our children, over one another. But especially within our families, we have spiritual authority. And God takes that seriously. So what does it mean to pray over our children? To put God's blessing upon them? And step into that role of spiritual authority in an economy where God has imbued us with the power of his Spirit. And words as his image bearers that actually matter. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through and I'm going to teach point by point on the priestly blessing. What does it mean? What are we saying? What are we asking God to do and employing him to do by his power? But to prepare us for that, we're going to sing through that as we end today. The God who blesses, the God who protects from generation to generation. The God who has a strong arm, mighty outstretched hand that works on our behalf. Amen.